Some nights, the world feels normal, until you realize you were never alone. A shadow standing in the ocean, watching without moving. A silent boat drifting in the dark, hiding something far worse inside. And a house that should have been empty, where something was already waiting beneath you. These aren't just stories. They are moments where reality cracks and something unknown slips through. Listen carefully, because once you hear them, you might start noticing things that were always there in the dark.
Are you ready to open the door to fear? Then put on your headphones. I'm Azad, Ga Chomchom. Tonight's real story comes from Raihan.
I was 17, a senior in high school, and like most guys my age, my world revolved around one thing: girls. There was one girl in my physics class who stood above all the rest. Her name was Tiffany. Some people called her Crazy Tiff, not just because she was stunningly attractive, but because rumors swirled around her like a dark fog. Her exes claimed she had a strange, unpredictable side. I didn't care. To me, she was perfect. That Friday night felt like fate aligning. My best friend, CJ, had managed to convince Tiffany's close friend, Gianna, to hang out with us at a secluded beach. Even better, Tiffany agreed to come along. This was my chance. Our plan was simple: split off into pairs so I could finally get some alone time with her. CJ pulled up to my house at exactly 10 p.m. I hopped into the passenger seat, my heart pounding with anticipation. As we drove to pick them up, we repeated the plan again and again, making sure everything would go smoothly. But beneath my excitement, there was a strange uneasiness I couldn't explain. When Tiffany and Gianna got into the car, everything felt surprisingly natural. We joked, laughed, and talked like we had known each other for years. Tiffany laughed at something I said, and for a moment, I felt invincible. By the time we reached the beach, I was sure this night was going to be unforgettable. The beach was eerily empty. No people, no lights, just the endless stretch of sand, the rhythmic crashing of waves, and the darkness swallowing everything beyond a few feet. The air felt colder than it should have been. CJ wasted no time. Within minutes, he and Gianna disappeared into the darkness, just as planned. That left Tiffany and me alone. We walked toward the water, letting the cold waves brush against our feet. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, black and silent, like something alive, watching. We eventually sat down on the sand, talking about random things: school, music, life. Everything felt perfect, until Tiffany suddenly went quiet. She pointed toward the ocean. "Do you see that?" she whispered. I squinted into the darkness, but saw nothing. I chuckled nervously, assuming she was messing with me. "I don't see anything," I said. But something in her expression, it wasn't a joke. Trying to act brave, I stood up and walked closer to the water. The cold waves crept around my ankles as I stepped deeper, staring into the void. That's when I saw it. Something standing in the water. At first, it looked like a tall figure, too still, too straight. My eyes struggled to adjust, but I could make out its outline. It wasn't moving. Then, suddenly, it shifted. A slow, unnatural movement. My heart nearly stopped. I stumbled backward out of the water, my breath caught in my throat. I rushed back to Tiffany. "There's someone out there," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. No one should be standing out there, not at this hour, not in that freezing water. And the way it moved, it didn't feel human.
The cold wind swept across the empty beach as I sat beside Tiffany, both of us staring into the endless darkness of the ocean. My heart was still racing from what I had seen moments ago. Someone, or something, had been standing in the water. Tiffany wrapped her arms around her knees, clearly uneasy. The playful energy from earlier had vanished, replaced by a quiet tension that seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. "That guy is still out there," she whispered. I turned back toward the ocean. The waves rolled in slowly, their dark shapes barely visible under the faint moonlight. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it. But then, a ripple moved across the water. Something shifted again. My stomach twisted. Even from that distance, I could tell the figure was still there, standing unnaturally still, as if it had been watching us the entire time. The longer I stared, the more unsettling it felt. No normal person would stand waist-deep in freezing ocean water at night without moving, without speaking. "Let's move somewhere else," Tiffany said nervously. I nodded quickly. Honestly, I wanted to get away from there just as badly. We walked farther down the beach, away from the dark patch of water where the figure stood. The sand crunched softly beneath our feet, and the sound of the waves followed us like a distant whisper. After a while, we sat down again, hoping we had finally found some privacy. For a few minutes, everything seemed calm again. Then, Tiffany suddenly froze. "Wait, do you hear that?" she asked quietly. I listened carefully. At first, there was nothing but the ocean. Then, I heard it. A faint splashing sound. Not from the waves. Something smaller, slower, like footsteps moving through water. The sound stopped as suddenly as it started. Both of us turned toward the ocean again. That's when Tiffany gasped sharply. The figure was closer now, much closer. It stood just beyond the waves again, its tall shape barely visible in the darkness. But there was no mistaking it this time. It had moved. Chill ran down my spine. I stood up, trying to look tough, even though every instinct in my body was telling me to run. "I'm gonna tell him to back off," I said. Tiffany grabbed my arm. "Let's just go back to the car," she said quickly. Relief washed over me. "Yeah, good idea." We walked quickly back across the dunes toward the parking area where CJ's Jeep was waiting. But when we got there, CJ and Gianna weren't anywhere around. That's when my phone suddenly started vibrating like crazy. Message after message from CJ. Apparently, he had been texting me repeatedly while we were on the beach, but I had no reception near the water. The first message read, "Dude, some weird guy is in the water watching us." My chest tightened. The next message came a few minutes later. "Something is following us in the dark. Get to the car now." Then another. "It looks deformed. Hurry." My hands started shaking as I scrolled through the texts. He even tried calling me 3 times. I immediately called him back. He answered instantly, breathing heavily like he had been running. "Are you at the car?" he asked urgently. "Yes," I replied. "Good, stay there." He hung up. Less than 30 seconds later, CJ and Gianna suddenly emerged from the darkness beside the Jeep. Both of them looked terrified. CJ leaned against the car, struggling to catch his breath. "There's something out there," he said. "What do you mean, something?" I asked. He looked straight at me. "Not person," he said quietly. "A creature." Before I could even react, a horrifying scream echoed across the beach. It sounded half human and half something far worse. Every one of us jumped into the car in pure panic. Even now, years later, I still remember that sound. Sometimes I wonder, was the thing I saw standing in the ocean really a person? Or was it the same deformed humanoid creature CJ claimed to have been following them through the darkness?
Before the rest of the story begins, I need to ask, are you facing this fear alone? How does it feel? Write it in the comments. If you're new here, subscribe.
Growing up near the beaches of Florida, the ocean was always a part of our lives. The sound of waves, the golden sunsets, the salty breeze, it all felt normal to us. My two sisters and I would often visit the beach during the quieter hours, especially around sunset, when the crowds disappeared and the world felt strangely peaceful. But sometimes, that silence hides something far more disturbing. That evening started like any other. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep red. The beach was nearly empty, with only the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. My younger sister, Ksenia, who was just 13 at the time, was full of energy as always. "I'm going in the water," she said excitedly. I hesitated. It was getting dark. "As long as you're back in 10 minutes, I told her firmly. Being the older brother, I had to keep things under control. She nodded and ran toward the ocean, her figure quickly blending into the dim light. At first, everything seemed fine. I watched her for a minute as she splashed in the shallow water. Then, thinking nothing of it, I looked down at my phone. My other sister, who was 16, walked up to me holding an old, slightly deflated volleyball. "Want to play?" she asked. I shrugged. "Sure." There was a worn-out volleyball net nearby, barely standing, but it was good enough. We started playing casually, laughing and trying to keep the ball in the air. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Too normal. Then, suddenly, I looked back toward the ocean. Ksenia was gone. At first, I thought she had just moved further down the shore. I scanned the water carefully, my eyes adjusting to the growing darkness. Nothing. I walked closer to the shoreline. Still nothing. A cold wave of panic began to rise in my chest. "Ksenia!" I shouted. No response. The beach suddenly felt much bigger and much emptier. I ran into the water, ignoring the freezing temperature. When I couldn't run anymore, I started swimming, pushing myself forward as fast as I could. But she wasn't there. Not anywhere. The water stretched endlessly around me, dark and silent. That's when I noticed something. A boat, not far from where I was. It was large, far too large to be out here unnoticed. A luxurious-looking boat, gently rocking with the waves. There were faint lights glowing from inside. My heart pounded. Could she be there? Without thinking, I swam toward it. Each stroke felt heavier than the last, the fear inside me growing stronger with every second. When I finally reached the boat, I grabbed onto a small metal ladder and pulled myself up onto the deck. The surface was quiet. Too quiet. Then, I heard something. Laughter, coming from below deck. My blood ran cold. There was a hatch slightly open, with dim light spilling out from inside. I swallowed hard and called out, "Hello?" The laughter stopped instantly. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. "I'm looking for my sister!" I shouted, my voice shaking. For a moment, nothing. Then, suddenly, a voice came from below. "Ksenia? Brother?" It was Ksenia.
The moment I heard Ksenia's voice from below deck, a wave of relief crashed over me, but it was quickly replaced by something far darker. Something felt wrong. Her voice didn't sound panicked. It sounded calm. Too calm. I rushed toward the open hatch and climbed down into the cabin. The dim yellow light flickered slightly, casting long, distorted shadows across the narrow space. And then I saw her. Ksenia was sitting on a small bed, holding a can of soda as if nothing had happened. She looked up at me with a faint smile. "Hey," she said softly. For a split second, I froze. Why wasn't she scared? Why was she here? Then I noticed them. Further inside the cabin, sitting across from each other, were two grown men. They were watching me, silently. Their expressions didn't change as I stepped closer. One of them slowly leaned back, a strange smile creeping across his face. My instincts screamed at me. Something was very, very wrong. I quickly walked over and grabbed Ksenia by the arm, pulling her up. "We're leaving," I said firmly. One of the men chuckled softly. "You've got a very nice sister," he said. The way he said it, it made my skin crawl. The other man quickly spoke up, almost as if trying to fix the situation. "Hey, relax," he said. "We just saw her alone in the water. Thought we'd help her out, gave her a drink, that's all." His tone sounded casual, too casual, like he had rehearsed it. I didn't respond, not a single word. Every second I stayed there felt dangerous. "Do you need a ride back to shore?" the first man asked, still smiling. I ignored him. "Ksenia, let's go," I said, gripping her hand tightly. Without waiting for another second, I led her back up the ladder and onto the deck. The cool night air hit my face, but it didn't calm me. If anything, it made everything feel more real. We jumped back into the water and started swimming toward the shore. I didn't look back, not once. The silence behind us felt heavy, like we were being watched. After a few minutes, we reached the beach. My other sister ran toward us, panicked and confused. "Where were you?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just turned back toward the ocean. The boat was already moving away, slowly disappearing into the darkness, as if it had never been there at all. That night, I told my father everything. He was furious, not just at Ksenia, but at me too. "You should have gotten details. The boat, their faces, anything." He was right, but in that moment, all I cared about was getting her out of there. From that day on, Ksenia was never allowed near the beach alone again, especially after sunset. And even now, I still think about those men, about the way they looked at her. And sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't noticed she was gone?
Before the rest of the story begins, I need to ask, are you facing this fear alone? How does it feel? Write it in the comments. If you're new here, subscribe.
I owned a small beach house in Florida. Nothing too fancy, but it was peaceful, quiet, a perfect escape from the chaos of everyday life. I would often visit it with my girlfriend, especially during the colder months up north. That February, the cold in Connecticut was unbearable, so we decided to take a trip. After a long, exhausting drive that took nearly a day and a half, we finally arrived at the beach house just as the sun was beginning to set. The sky was fading into darkness, and the familiar sound of waves welcomed us back. Everything seemed normal, too normal. Since I visited frequently during winter, I always kept the electricity and water running, so when we arrived, there was nothing to set up, just unpack and relax. But we were too tired even for that. We grabbed a couple of lounge chairs and walked the short distance to the beach. The air was cool, the sand soft beneath us. Within minutes, we both drifted into a light sleep under the darkening sky. I don't know how long we slept, but suddenly, my girlfriend nudged me awake. "Did you leave a light on?" she asked quietly. Still half asleep, I turned toward the house, and that's when I saw it. One of the upstairs lights was on. My heart skipped a beat. "I didn't turn anything on," I said. Then I noticed something else. At the window of that room, behind the thin curtains, there was a shadow, a figure, standing still, watching. Every trace of sleep vanished instantly. We both stared at the house in silence, the realization sinking in at the same time. Someone was inside. "I'm going to check," I said, trying to stay calm. "Wait," she whispered, but I was already moving. I ran toward the house as fast as I could, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I reached the back door, I slowed down, forcing myself to be quiet. I carefully slid the door open and stepped inside. The house was dark, silent, too silent. Barefoot, I moved slowly across the floor, each step careful, controlled. I didn't want whoever was inside to know I was there. I reached the staircase and started going up. Halfway up the stairs, click, a door shut upstairs. I froze. Someone was definitely there. I rushed up the rest of the stairs, my fear now mixed with adrenaline. When I reached the top, I saw the room where the light had been on. The door was open, but the light was off. A chill ran down my spine. Just minutes ago, someone had been standing there. I stepped inside slowly, grabbing a flashlight from a nearby shelf. I didn't turn on the room light. I didn't want to give away my position. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness. The room looked empty. But then, I noticed the closet. The door was closed. I was sure it hadn't been before. My grip tightened on the flashlight. That must have been the sound I heard, the door closing. I slowly approached it, each step heavier than the last. My breathing became shallow as I reached out and grabbed the handle. For a moment, I just stood there, listening. Nothing. Complete silence. Then, suddenly, I pulled the door open.
The closet doors swung open with a sharp creak. I quickly raised the flashlight and pointed it inside. Nothing. Just empty space, hanging clothes, still air. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, trying to process it. Had I imagined everything? The shadow? The movement? The sound of the door? No, something wasn't right. Then, a faint creak echoed from behind me. Not inside the closet. From the hallway. I spun around instantly and rushed out of the room, expecting to come face to face with the intruder. But instead, it was my girlfriend. "What are you doing here?" I snapped in a hushed but angry tone. "I didn't want to stay out there alone," she said, clearly shaken. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Stay close," I told her. Now that she was inside, we had no choice. We had to search the entire house, together. We moved through the upstairs rooms one by one. Bedroom, bathroom, closets, every corner. Nothing. No sign of anyone. We checked downstairs next. Kitchen, living room, storage areas, every door, every shadow. Still nothing. It was as if whoever had been inside had vanished into thin air. We double-checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. No signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no missing items. It didn't make sense. Eventually, exhaustion took over. We convinced ourselves that maybe it was just our imagination, or someone who had already left before we came inside. So we locked everything again,
and went to bed. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The room was dark, silent, too silent. We lay there, trying to fall asleep. Then, click. A soft sound, right beneath us. My eyes snapped open. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Yes," she replied immediately. My heart began pounding again. Slowly, I slid off the bed and knelt down on the floor. Every movement felt heavy, careful, controlled. I lowered my head, inch by inch, until my eyes reached the level of the floor. And then, I looked under the bed. My blood ran cold. There was a man lying there. His eyes locked onto mine instantly. For a split second, neither of us moved, neither of us breathed. Then suddenly, he lunged out from under the bed and sprinted toward the front door. "Hey!" I shouted, jumping to my feet and chasing after him. But I was too slow. Barefoot and disoriented, I couldn't catch him before he burst out the door and disappeared into the darkness. Gone. Just like that. We searched the house again, every inch of it, but there was nothing. No stolen items, no signs of how he got in, no clue who he was. It was like he had been there, just watching us, waiting. We didn't call the police. We didn't even tell anyone. We just tried to forget. But even now, sometimes when I lie in bed at night, I can still hear that faint sound, that soft, almost invisible click. And I can't help but wonder, how long had he been under that bed before I finally looked?
For now, we stop here, but the night still holds many unknown stories. Stay with us for more heart-pounding horror tales, if you can face the darkness.